Okay, good morning. My name is Gary Matsuoka, and we're here at Laguna Hills Nursery in Santa Ana. It's a Saturday morning, and today's class is on planting bare root trees. So this is a real fun time for us. One of the few times of the year where you can get a tree that was grown in the Central Valley on a farm for a few years sent down. You can see how big this is. This is ready to produce fruit. And these are less than container trees are of last year we sold the number 5 or 5 gallon container trees for average $69. This tree is 64, and it's a lot bigger. This won't fit in the number 5 containers. You can see how big they are. So it's nice to have them this size. We've got a number of trees that come to us this big. Now, most of them are not that big. Now, this is the smaller end. This is a persimmon tree, no branching, single stem. I believe this was a 3/8 inch caliper trunk. This is a 3/4 inch caliper trunk, or this might be actually 1 inch caliper trunk, how it's graded. So that's the difference. Now, most orchards will tell you if you're running an orchard, they don't recommend you buy anything larger than this. So generally from this size on most bare root fruit trees, if you get them 3/8 inch, within 8 months they look like this. The majority of them. Now this persimmon won't. Persimmons are a little slower, but let's say we had this peach tree here from last year. So this was a bare root last year. It was a 1/2 inch caliper. It's grown, so now it's about a 5/8 inch caliper. You can see it stretched the tag quite a bit. And we've cut it twice to keep it in this pot. Otherwise, it would be about 8 to 10 foot tall by now. In this pot, it's about a 5-footer. So they grow relatively rapidly. Like we expect this plant within a year to be about 10 by 10. So you don't have to buy them big. We like to buy them big because the nice thing about it, they're not that much more expensive. And potentially this will fruit this year, maybe a dozen or so fruit. So that's nice to have as something younger, whereas something like this most likely will not fruit. Occasionally we get 1 or 2 on something this size, but generally it takes another year before that to start fruiting. So if you're putting them in the ground, in most cases you just dig a hole big enough to get the root system in. So these roots are only about 1 foot deep, and this one's about 2 foot across. So generally you make the hole big enough to get them in, and that's about it. We don't expect you to go, I don't know why. There's literature around that says make it twice deep and twice as wide still. Generally, roots of plants don't go below 1 foot in our soil in Orange County. Now, if you've got very sandy soil, they can grow deeper than that, but you certainly don't need to make a hole that deep. Just to get it big enough to fit the root system in. And just put the same soil back. So the only time we've ever run into trouble with clay soil is if it's the lowest part of your yard where the water sits and you put a persimmon tree in there. They might have trouble with that poorly draining wet soil, but we really haven't seen much trouble with any other fruit tree as long as there's no compost with it. Compost in the ground is a big no-no. So one of the most important things we'll tell you is no compost amendment. Unfortunately, most nurseries will tell you put a lot of compost in the ground to make the soil richer. It'll make it richer if you're talking about full of bacteria, fungus, just rotting plant material, not not good for the roots. So keep the compost out of the hole. If you've got, if you want, you can put sand in the hole. You can put our potting soil in the hole. It's fine. There's no compost in our potting soil. But still, just putting the native soil back in. I mean, these were plowed out of the ground a month ago, so they've never seen a container. And it's nice to put them right back in the ground with the native soil. These aren't usually grown in sandy soils. There once was, if they're grown in too sandy a soil, what happens is the roots, instead of being more horizontal like this, they go straight down, and you get these big carrot roots going straight down. It's not ideal. So most of the bare root trees, bare root roses on top of that are grown in more of a heavy soil, so the roots stay closer to the surface and spread out more. So again, no amendments. They say when the orchards are planting bare root trees, they've got 2 guys digging the hole. It takes them about 20 seconds to dig the hole. One person installs a tree in the ground, and then those 2 guys fill the hole, and they get it done within 1 minute. They go to the next tree. Now, we like you to take a little more time than that. So the main thing to look for on these trees, now these, being plowed out of the ground, there's going to be a lot of breaks, broken roots and things like that to start with. So we do recommend when we process the trees, we try to catch all the badly broken stuff and take it off for you. But if we don't, if it just cracks slightly, it's probably going to heal. But if it's badly broken, like that's really badly broken, so let's just get rid of that with a clean cut. That way it can heal better. This one's split really bad, so we'll get rid of that. This one's kind of mashed on the tip, so we'll cut it to a smaller wound. That one's broken. So you can kind of poke them and see if they're badly broken or not. Again, if they're slightly smashed, they might be able to repair. And generally, they don't need a whole lot of root. If this had 1/10 of the root system it has, it would make it. Because they're totally dormant, they're not using water right now, and they'll grow roots they'll grow their roots as fast as they grow their leaves this coming year. So this coming spring, they should leaf out in about a month and a half to 2 months. So usually by March these things are growing. Some will leaf out earlier. So the top of this, you can leave it like that. Now it has got some issues with being a lot of branches close together. But if you want to leave it like this, there's no problem. A lot of flower buds on this, so whatever you cut off will lose flower buds. Now here's one thing that I might do. This branch here and this branch here are just really close together. So if this one's got nicer flower buds on it, I might just take that one off or cut it short so it branches out somewhere else. So let's say cut it to here, and then this bud here hopefully will make a branch coming into this open area. And here you've got a couple of parallel branches going the same direction, which you don't need. So I might take off one of the 2. This is not too bad. It's about like that. Now, if you want to really play it safe, we're not a real hot climate here, so it's not, well, we can get hot. We've gotten hot in the past. So the most vulnerable part of a grafted fruit tree, and if this was seedling grown, it would be a straight stem, straight up, just like a fishing pole. But these are grafted. So this is the rootstock. They graft on one side of this rootstock, so the scion or part we are wanting. So this down here is a citation rootstock, which won't fruit. And then this is the cotton candy apron, which will, but it comes out at an angle because it's grafted onto the side. So there is a little area right here that's very vulnerable to sunburning. So if you want to avoid that, you face this area north. Right where it's grafted, you face that north. Actually, you face it south. So the graft will face south. So if the sun's coming in from this side and hitting this way, you face the graft to the south side, and now this slanted area is facing north, and not likely to get sunburnt. I haven't seen it too often. I had some apple trees once that sunburned right there. And it's usually not that serious, but if you want to play it safe, face the graft toward the south so the sun can't hit anything. And generally the branches, the sun really has a hard time hitting those branches too because they're all going outwards.
What happens to them when they sunburn?
Well, like when I had an apple tree sunburn, that part of the tissue dies and then it flakes off. And I actually had some borers going through that wounded area, which wasn't good. Eventually what happens is the bark around it just covers it back up. So, but if it's, so this is probably a fairly weak area of the tree right above this graft area, because that's an unnatural wound right there. Now you want to plant them deep enough. There is a range. This appears to be the original soil level. You can go, from the top of the roots up to the bottom of the graft. So you've got about a 4 or 5 inch or even 6 inch area you can play with that way. But the original graft or the soil level was right about here. Once this was 40 years ago, my first house, I planted them all this deep to see if it would cause any major problems, and nothing happened. But if you plant them too deep, if you plant it this deep, these roots will be so far in the ground that they may just rot away because they can't breathe anymore. So it's better to, especially if you have heavy clay soil, not to go too deep into the ground. For most fruit trees. There are some exceptions. And, they always say make a mound under bare roots that'll, this roots on this thing aren't really mound shaped. It's not a big deal. But when you, so when you get the soil back around it, make sure it fills all the gaps. I mean, when you water it, and we will be watering bare root when you plant them this year because we haven't had rain. The last few years we've had like 2 or 3 inches of rain before the bare roots came in. The year before that we had at least 10 inches of rain before the bare root trees came in, so the soil is pretty moist. This year we've had less than an inch of rain so far. Which is really dry for Southern California. They say it's not the driest year we've ever had, but it's close. Second driest start to the year we've ever had. That's been recorded. So make sure you water thoroughly. Now, when you backfill the hole and you add the water, so let's draw this in here. So you got the roots, you got your stem, you got the grafted area in your trees like this. What I like to do with the first irrigation, so you backfill the soil in the hole and then see if you can make a nice watering basin with the dirt. And then you water several times or thoroughly right above that hole. I like to hold the trunk the first time you water it and the water settling, because sometimes if you have the soil in there unevenly, the tree leans. I've had that happen to me once, and once it leans and the soil settles once, it is really hard to change the direction of that trunk. So with the first thorough watering, you might stand there and hold that trunk straight as the water settles. It may take a while to settle. But yeah, aesthetically, I mean, as far as the tree's concerned, it's probably not a big deal. But aesthetically, it's nice to be straight. Now, they say in orchards, they do not fertilize the first year in the ground. The trees apparently have enough nutrients in them to get them through the first year, especially if they're in the ground. If they're in a pot, there is absolutely no nutrition in potting soil, so you've got to fertilize, and that is in our potting soil, so you've got to fertilize them. Now, we usually tell people go ahead and fertilize. So the reason they don't do it in orchards is because when we fertilize these trees, they'll grow about 6 feet the first year. So if you're in an orchard, you don't have good windbreaks there. If you have that much more foliage on top and the roots aren't big yet because they got cut, this tree may blow over. So they keep them quiet the first year in the orchard. Now in your own backyard, not a big deal. You can prune them to keep them, if it gets real windy, you can prune them to take some of the wind resistance off of them. But fertilizing will get them growing, close to 6 feet the first year. If you don't fertilize them, they might grow about 4 feet. And these are all excellent fertilizers that people use. The organics are better in the long run. This is a time-release chemical that we use in containers, just because if you in a container, fertilizers generally flush through within a month, and you got to do it over and over and over. In the ground, these don't have any place to flush out, so they're better in the ground, or fine in the ground. We use Osmocote in pots just because we don't want to keep making the rounds and fertilizing every month to keep them going. Now, if you do grow them in pots, we grow everything in our top pot potting soil. It resembles sand. So if you want to just grow them in pure sand in a container that's big enough, like you saw that root ball there, the big one won't fit even in here. It'd have to go into this is a 25 gallon, which is a half barrel size. So, of course, if you filled this with sand, that would be about 300 pounds of sand. So it's a little heavy. Our top pot, it would weigh about 120 pounds of top pot. And this size too, over 150 pounds of sand, maybe 160. Our top pot would weigh about 50 pounds. So it's about a third the weight of sand. So that's the main difference. But sand works fine. Fruit, in containers, the original potting soil was sand, and it works just fine. Now, persimmons, we do like to plant them on the deep side. Persimmons, the experts have told us, persimmons and pears, we like to go to the bud union on the depth of planting. One of the problems with persimmons is their root system's black. And if any of it's above ground level, it just burns in the sun. It burns terribly. So we want to make sure it's planted deep. Go ahead and plant it to the bud union where they grafted it. Pear trees just tend to lose a lot of moisture out of their roots. The roots are very non-hairy. They lose moisture real bad, so they always say plant pears up to the bud union too, so you don't lose moisture. So those two trees we plant deep. Now, a lot of our bare roots do come with some of the soil from the Central Valley still on them. You can leave it, although we have found in the past that if you wash this off, they grow a little bit better. And the reason for that is that in the Central Valley, these trees are planted less than a foot apart in the field. So they plant these like a crop, and they're real close together. So one of the things we will notice is that this soil that came with this plant has a few severed roots from the plant next to it, which is detrimental to the health of the root system to have pieces of dead roots. So we found any plant. So if there's a bunch, now the only plants that usually come with a bunch of dirt are persimmons and apples. Most of the other root systems, like you saw, that one's really clean. But if you find some roots wound up in those roots, they're not connected to that tree, get rid of it. That does happen on well-rooted trees. Sometimes the root systems get tangled up and they tear off. But we did do a test like 20 years ago where we washed, when we weren't in the drought, we washed all the dirt off the persimmons on some and not on others. We noticed the ones without, when we washed the soil off the roots, that they did a little better. Again, here's a crack root, so we'll take that off. Now, the other thing that we do with fruit trees when we plant them is prune them to get a better crop. So the nice thing about, 40 years ago when I first started in this business, the fruit trees all look like this. And if you don't prune them, what tends to happen is just the top branches, the top buds tend to open up, and you have on this one about 4 to 5 foot of bare trunk with branching up here. So your branching starts right about here and the fruit's forming up here. So nowadays, if we have just a single trunk, we want to prune it down to the height we want the branching to start. Now, commercially, they'll do it at 18 inches. Commercially, they don't care what the tree looks like. I would tell you in a home garden, 18 inches makes it look like a bush and it's not as pretty. I'd probably go around 30 inches. Put them right about 30 inches when you plant them. And then you'll get your branching structure starting right about waist height with a lot of your fruit forming right where it's easy to pick. Again, with this tree, this comes really well branched with a lot of flower buds already on it. I don't know that I would really touch this much. Now, there are a few more real tight branches in here. Might take a few of them out. And also on stone fruit. So the stone fruit we sell need winter chill. Winter chill, the air is that's the air temperature in the wintertime. You'll notice that in the winter on a windless night, not a windy night, but a windless night, the air is definitely much colder closer to the ground than it is off the ground. And if you live in a hilly neighborhood, you can feel it in the morning or in the evening. You're walking around your neighborhood and you go downhill, everything suddenly gets a lot colder than going uphill. So on a deciduous fruit tree, so in Orange County here, California, we're really short on chill. A lot of these fruit trees, like this fruit tree wants close to 300 hours of chill. So far this year, we are right around 100 hours. It depends where you live. If you live on the Santa Ana River, that's a colder spot. You probably got over 200 hours of chill there. If you live on a hilltop, you may be less than 100 hours there. This thing needs close to 300 hours of chill. Now, there's 24 hours in a day. If you stay below 55 degrees the entire day, you'll get maybe 15 hours of chill in one day. So it doesn't take many days to get the chill. The Central Valley where these trees are grown, southern Central Valley, they get around 800, they average probably 800 to 1,000 hours of chill. And chill is below 55 degrees and above 34. So the lower you can keep the branches on a stone fruit. So if you have a stone fruit tree that doesn't come with any branching for 5 foot, I would probably cut that down even below 30 inches to get as much branching as you can, as low to the ground as you can, because you'll get more chill there. We've noticed on our fruit trees, on years without adequate chill, a lot of times just the bottom branch is fruit. If we have a lot of chill, the top branches make the most fruit because, and the best fruit because that's got the most sunlight energy the last fall. But we don't have adequate chill, only the bottom branches fruit, the top branches won't bloom. So stone fruit trees, yeah, you might want to, if you don't have adequate branching near the bottom, you might want to cut the tree short to force that branching low. Now, it is true, as these trees grow older, the branches tend to drop down. Most fruit trees, the branches drop down. But you may want to start them that way. And then as they get older, cut off the branches that are too low and the other ones are coming down. Now, we don't have to spray these, so all the bare root companies spray them for insects, they spray them for diseases, and they also spray them to keep them from drying out. So they apply anti-desiccant, I think it's a wax of some sort, to the trees. So generally, we, unlike roses, you know, with the bare roses, they apply wax to those too, but they're so vulnerable to drying out in the wind. You have to be careful with the bare roses. We've never had a problem with the fruit trees. I mean, of course, if you have, if you're at the top of a hill and you got no wind protection, it's blowing 40, 50 miles an hour, you got to watch it anyway because it'll blow them over. Now, just so you know, we don't usually stake bare root trees. I mean, the stake is not going to do a whole lot more than what that root system can do, because the stake's just one stick going straight in the ground. It would be really difficult to move this tree, even with a strong wind, once you get the dirt back around it and it's been watered a few times, because it would have to lift a lot of weight of dirt to move this tree. So generally, you don't have to stake unless, you know, your soil is really, really soft for some reason. And it is important not to let, quote, professional gardeners plant your trees. The only trees we get returned to us are homeowners that let their gardener plant it, and then they bring us the tree back and it smells like a sewer. Because what they did is they backfilled the hole with pure planter mixer potting soil, and it just rotted the roots out. So you do have to be careful, instruct anyone who's helping you to do it right. Just put in native soil back in that hole. Native soil has no tendency to rot, but compost and planter mixes, potting soils that are not ours, that we didn't recommend, will cause a lot of trouble.
Peat moss. Can you mix
Peat moss is,
really thick?
Well, peat moss doesn't help clay. The question was, can we add peat moss to clay? It doesn't help the clay, but it doesn't help it breathe. So the problem with clay is that there's no air pockets to let the air in. And peat doesn't do anything. Peat actually decomposes at a very slow rate, and it takes more air out of the ground. So it's actually going the wrong direction. Because we know if you put a plant in pure peat in a pot, the peat has enough structure to get air in there for about a year, and then after that, it just rots away because peat moss becomes black sludge. So you don't want anything that can change. The thing that will help sand breathe better is, clay breathe better is either sand or pumice or perlite, something that's permanently got some size and volume to it that'll allow the air to pass by it. But again, for most of these bare root trees, there is no problem with clay. The only one we've seen a problem with is persimmon. Cherries are next most, but I've grown cherries in clay soil. They didn't have any problem with that either. Real wet clay soil too. So now there is a rootstock that Dave Wilson sells that handles clay soil and compost-laden soils better. That's this. So they modified their tagging system this year. So the color of the tag will tell you which rootstock is on. This says citation rootstock. The front of the tag has the name of the plant. Citation rootstock happens to be the better rootstock for stone fruit in clay soil for incredibly wet conditions. Or compost. It tends to put up with compost better than the other rootstocks do. However, it doesn't handle drought at all. So if you have something on citation rootstock and it's drought, either you're going to lose it or you're going to throw extra water on it. During the last drought, when they told us to turn back the water by about 20%, in our garden, everything on citation rootstock died. Whether it was apricots, pluots, peach trees, everything on citation died when we cut the water back. Nothing else in the yard died. Nothing. It was that concise. So we know citation doesn't handle 20% drought. Now, under mild drought, it'll make the trees go to sleep early. Like when I first planted citation rootstock in my garden, the trees went to sleep in August, and I thought they had all died. And the sales rep told me, no, they just do this drought dormancy. So the next year they woke up and were fine. But when we had a true drought and we cut back the water 20%, none of them woke up. They all got killed off by the drought. So I'd rather use rootstock other than citation, but do know that some of the plants they sell only come on citation because that's the only rootstock that works for them. So we get those because we love those fruits. Just remember, you have to water them more. So these won't need much water till they wake up. Once they wake up, you go to a normal watering schedule. Now, all the research we're getting from the orchard research being done shows that the more frequently you water, the less water you need to apply, with no disadvantages. No disadvantages. There's still a lot of websites that'll tell you, if you water deeply and frequently, you'll develop a better, deeper root system. That was proven to be totally backwards. They did an orchard where they watered with the same irrigation system once a week, and the other half of the orchard they watered daily. Same amount of water for the entire week. When they pulled the trees out at the end of the year, the ones that were watered daily, they said had significantly bigger, deeper roots. They weren't expecting that, but that's what the results say. So if you water constantly, now a lot of orchards have switched even more recently to 3 times a day watering. Same amount of water for the week. 3 times a day watering. They said the trees just look and produce so much better. So we have the technology. You got timers. Now, if you're watering by hand, it is a challenge to water more than a couple times a week, which is, it's okay. But if you want the best quality production, the best size fruit, you want to water constantly. And my last house, I did have a good timer. We were watering 3 times a day every day for maybe 15 minutes on drip, 3 times a day every day during the summer months. I mean, during the, if it's below 55 degrees, these trees aren't using water even when they have leaves on them. So this, like the last 3 years or last 2 years, we haven't had any spring. Springs have been like 40 degrees at night or 50 degrees at night and 65 in the day. It's just been, so you may not have to water but once a week if the weather stays like that. But during the summer months, if we're in the high 80s, which is our average here, water daily, if not more than that. The goal is to keep the roots wet all the way through and through, and that's the top foot of soil. If you need to check that, you take a piece of rebar or a stick about this thick. If you can push it in where you're watering your trees a foot deep, it's moist a foot deep. If you can't push in a foot deep, up the watering a little bit. You want to keep your entire root system moist when they're either flowering, developing fruiting, or sizing the fruit up. Once they've been harvested, you can back off if you want. You don't need to. It's not going to hurt them. All this thing about overwatering, killing plants is hogwash. There's never such a thing. It's all due to compost in the ground. Compost rots a lot of plants. Pretty much all plants sold in containers in the U.S. are in compost. So that's why bare root is so nice. There's no compost on them when you get them. And as long as you don't put any ground, you're not going to cause any trouble. Now, we like to put, once these are in the ground and settled, give them a week or two for the dirt to settle. It might drop a little bit. You have to add some more. Then cover the ground with some kind of organic mulch. You can grow things on it if you want to do that instead. But it's nice to have the ground covered. We don't like bare dirt. Bare dirt in the summertime, they say if it's 90 degrees, the sun's hitting the ground, it's making the ground a foot deep. That's the entire root system well over 110 degrees, which is too hot for roots. Roots don't like it above 90. 90 is about the top limit. So if you cover the ground with 3 inches of some kind of mulch, dead leaves are what nature provides, or you grow some ground cover or some vegetables or flowers on here, that'll keep the ground all the way to the surface less than 90 degrees. And the roots will be much, much happier in the ground.
Is straw okay?
Yes.
Straw.
Oh, yes. We've heard of some orchards going 1.5 feet. 1.5 feet of, what they said they do is they call up the local tree trimmers, and they just dump loads and loads and loads after loads in the orchard, and they bury it with those chopped up dead trees 1.5 feet deep. And they said no weeding, hardly any fertilizing needed. Chopped up dead trees is perfect fertilizer for living trees. In many places, it also creates moisture. So if you have a humid climate, like this is orchards up in on the Washington Peninsula, so it is more humid year-round than we are. Although if you're in Newport Beach, you're going to stay pretty humid there. They said they haven't had to water their orchards since the 80s, once they found out that putting that 1.5 feet of mulch will keep the soil moist also. So no matter what, putting a mulch that deep will generate some moisture.
Doesn't it harbor insects?
Pardon?
Doesn't it harbor insects?
Well, Not really. Most insects, well, insects that would hurt your trees don't like that stuff. So most insects like living tissue. Uh, Termites can live in that, but termites are plant helpers. So in nature, termites don't eat living things. They only eat dead wood. So they said termites help trees, any tree, live longer because they'll clean up the dead wood on the tree. Because I remember when I was a kid, my neighbor's apricot tree fell over after, it was a real old apricot, the trunk this big. And we noticed it was all termite eaten. We thought the termites had killed it. But the forest department found out that termites do not eat living wood, they only eat dead wood. So without termites, trees would die quicker from fungus infections because fungus will eat dead stuff and then it won't stop. It'll continue eating the living wood, whereas the termites cleaned out the dead wood well enough that the fungus couldn't compete with them. So they said trees live longer due to termites. It doesn't make your house any good, but termites are good for plants. So we don't worry too much about the bugs in there. I mean, this is a perfect area for earthworms and pill bugs and all the saprophytes that eat dead things and return the minerals to the ground. Fungi, bacteria. In nature, it's supposed to average 5 inches throughout the world. I mean, you go to some forests, it's 2 foot deep, 3 foot deep. A friend of mine went down to a wild where avocado trees were wild and down in Mexico, and he says it was 5 foot of dead leaves on top of the ground there. They could not believe how deep it was. So, of course, in the desert, there's hardly anything. So, wait, good mulch layer. We generally don't need to whitewash trees like we do with avocados. We whitewash them to prevent them from burning. You can, and it does help with chill. So like this, on this plant here, the flower buds need to stay cool in the winter to develop properly. It's each bud, it's not the trunk, it's not the roots, it has nothing to do with it. But the flower buds need to stay cool to develop properly on stone fruit. And in Palo Alto, they said when the Silicon Valley was evolving and the factories moving in, they said it raised the temperature in their orchards by 10 degrees. So they painted them white to keep them going as long as they could, because the factories were just changing the whole climate of that valley. So you can paint the branches white in the winter if you want them. We use white latex, or the stuff we use on the organic stuff we use on avocado trees is diatomaceous earth mixed with milk. Okay, any other questions today? If I remember anything else here.
Do you have a projected number of chill hours based on what you're seeing for this year?
Well, we think we'll get to 300, because next week it's supposed to be under 70 degrees at the end of next week we're supposed to have a stretch of 5 days under 70, and one day, next Saturday, is supposed to stay below 60. So and it doesn't take long, only 2 weeks of real cool weather to get chill, and this is a La Nina year, which means we shouldn't get any tropical air coming in. It's just the Santa Anas that are messing us up right now, getting the temperature up in the low 70s, which messes up the chill for the day. So if you can stay out of the 70s, stay 65 or below, you get about 300 hours of chill. And if you can stay under 60, you can either easily get, this is like 4 or 5 years ago, we got like 150 hours of chill in 2 weeks at the end of March, which was almost too late, but we got it. We noticed that the plum trees all woke up all of a sudden at the end of March. So we got the chill in You know, like last year was El Nino year, which means we get more tropical air. And at least it was cloudy in the entire winter, so we didn't get any 70-degree days, but we didn't get that much chill. We got a little over 300 hours last year. The year before we had 500, but we didn't have a spring, which kind of messed us up a bit. But this year we expect about 300 hours. We'll see. We just don't know. I mean, it'd be nice to have one of those Yukon Expresses come through for a change. They're having that on the East Coast. The Yukon, the real cold air coming down from Canada. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Did you hear it?
Mhm.